Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Liu. I'm joined once again by friend of the program, Sam Vecenie, the Athletic senior NBA writer and draft expert, one of the busiest people on planet Earth when it comes to day one of draft day. We got Sam on the program, not just because he's so generous to join us at 1 a.m. local time here in Toronto, but also because, Sam, you called it. Raptors took Jacobe Walter at the 19th pick. Yeah, tell us how you got to this and who the Raptors are getting with the 19th pick here.
Yeah, so like I had very few. I would say the Raptors. I think I said this whenever I was on the show pre-draft. The Raptors were probably the team in the first round that I had, if not the team I had the least feel for. One of them, one of the couple of players that I had been told that they had liked were Jacobe Walter and Zach Edey, basically. And Eve Missy, I guess, was the third one. I hadn't gotten a great sense of the order for them. I hadn't gotten a great sense of where exactly, like they kind of racked and stacked, like on their board, or like how they fell, like if like Dalton Connect would have fallen, like magically, like almost happened, right? Like I didn't have any sense of that, but you know, I'd gotten like a couple of names, basically, and got lucky picking one. Like other teams, like I had like a pretty good sense of the order. Like if this happens, this happens. If that happens, this happens. Toronto, I didn't. Like it's just totally like blind. It's not blind luck, but it's like pretty lucky.
Well, you know what? Honestly, it seems like first off, Toronto like very much likes to be mysterious. Like I think Bobby actually takes particular pleasure in trying to keep the pick in the dark, keep all the information in house, all that kind of stuff. That's not to say that they don't deal with media. Like I'm sure when they have transaction, they'll leak to Shams and Woj. That's just how business is done. But like, yeah, in this case, Jacobe Walter, I was reading your mock draft, and I'm sure a lot of people have read the same sort of lines here. Walter had an up and down season, averaging 14 points, inconsistent shooter, although few teams have concerns over his long-term upside because the motion looks clean. So the percentage, I think he was 38% overall from the field and then 34% from three. What is it about the shooting motion, I suppose, or even just like the shooting profile that looks better than sort of like the percentages there? Because that seems to be the number one thing he could shoot.
For sure. So two things. Mechanics look great. There's just not really another way to put it. Like the mechanics just look really clean. Can take them from longer distances, takes them off of movement. Big number for Jacobe Walter is that he made the 32nd most threes in all of college basketball this season in the country off of screens and hit those at 40%. So basically volume and efficiency off of screens, right? The second piece of it is he's always been a shooter. Like you go back to high school, like he had no problem knocking down shots at Link Academy. Like he's made shots at kind of every level. There have been moments where he's been more of a volume-y kind of shooter as opposed to a consistent like knockdown guy. But yeah, no, at the end of the day, I think he is somebody that will shoot. I don't really have a problem projecting him as a shooter.
Okay. That certainly is the number one item on the scouting report, and it is good to know because you can't just look at a flat percentage. Like it really just depends on like what kind of coverage you're getting, where you're shooting from, what kind of sets you're coming off of. So it's good to know that he has a long history of being a good shooter as well. The secondary skill, I think for me, is a bit of a question mark. I know that's something here you wrote as well. Walter isn't a lead guard because he doesn't see the floor well as a passer. Defensively, struggled at times to stay in front of his players. I think Walter, he's given a couple of interviews now because he's been drafted, keeps insisting that he's a two-way player. What are you seeing there in terms of like what's most likely going to be that secondary skill that like actually gets him into a rotation once he develops that?
I think it probably will be the defense. Look, he can like attack a closeout and like be okay like in the mid-range pull-up game. Like he can get to a floater. Like he can do that stuff for sure offensively. The passing isn't a great counter, but like his counter is getting into the mid-range and like being able to score that way. Defensively, I liked him a little bit more in high school. I felt like this year he was a bit stiff. In terms of like his movement patterns when trying to slide. Like if you go and you watch the Duke game where like he played against like Jared McCain, right? And played against like a few like really good players. And this was early in the season, right? But like he really struggled to stay in front of guys that are not quite as athletic as the standard he will play in the NBA, right? And there were quite a few examples of that throughout the season. Now, what I will say on top of this is almost like before even the skill set thing, Jacobe Walter is like, everybody will tell you, and I haven't met Jacobe, so like take this with a grain of salt, I guess, but like everybody will tell you he is an awesome kid, like an awesome human being that is highly competitive, super high end work ethic, like all of that is going to come to the table with Walter. So I think that that's where the idea comes from. He is very conscientious in how he approaches his game. He is very thoughtful. And I think that at some point he will hopefully get to a level where he can defend just by effort and the fact that he's longer. You know, he's 6'4" without shoes, 6'10" wingspan. He has tools to defend. He has the want to defend. It just didn't really happen this year effectively. And sometimes that happens for freshmen at the end of the day.
No, it's fair. And honestly, like all things considered, he actually had a pretty good freshman season. Like it's not particularly easy to just walk in and average 14 and lead the team in scoring as well. It seems like, so if there was like one huge swing skill, I said maybe it's besides the defense, maybe just like on the offensive end, if there was a swing skill in terms of like maybe he gets better off the dribble or maybe he gets better as a passer magically, one of these other skills. Because I think, like, what's his path to becoming a starter? Let's just say.
I think it would be defense, and I think it would be becoming like a KCP kind of clone.
Okay.
Like if I was him, that would be like a player I would watch a crazy amount of, would be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. The difference in my mind and why I had Jacobe in the 20s and why KCP went in the top 10 of his class is the hips and like the flexibility and like kind of the quickness. I think that KCP has always been a little bit better in those regards, but you know, maybe Jacobe can find a way to like open up his hips a little bit. Maybe he can find a way athletically to kind of work through those concerns. That would be the person that like I would just recommend watching above and beyond for Jacobe Walter is KCP. Figure out how to be elite at getting through screens defensively. Figure out how to be disruptive using your length to your advantage with your hands, contesting shots on closeouts, being able to get into guys' handle. Like, KCP is not quite an all defense guy to me, but pretty close.
Yeah.
If Jacobe Walter can be that, I think that that's how he becomes a starting caliber player.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, if you get a KCP with a 19th pick, I think you're more than ecstatic with that selection.
Home run if you get him. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we'll see sort of what happens with Jacobe. I think watching the draft, my feeling, especially obviously watching the Raptors at 19, was who else could be available. And when you saw some of the names, I mean, I know the last time we talked about sort of just 5 players, right? We talked about Zach Edey, who obviously went 9th to Memphis. We talked about like a guy like Khalil Ware, who ended up going to Heat Culture, which I think is actually a really nice fit for him, right? You know, really, really solid atmosphere. Can you get the most out of it? You know, fix the motor issues, et cetera, et cetera. But Dalton Connect, why did he slide to 17? It's not like draft, like teams realized all of a sudden, like, hey, he's 23. Like everyone knew this, but he's clearly one of the best players right now. If we're talking about who's going to walk onto the court, how do you get all the way down to 17?
It seems like to me that he was kind of second on just like a lot of boards, which happens sometimes. Like I remember, like back when DeAnthony Melton got drafted, like he was considered like a potential late first round pick. And he goes all the way at like 48 or something. And then like I talked to teams after, and it was like, oh no, he was like second on our board. And it was like that for, I swear, I think it was 6 teams or like 7 teams or something crazy. And he was just like that next guy. And like they had one guy ahead of him. My impression is that's kind of what it was in some cases with Dalton. In other cases, it was just like a matter of, you know, what is the organizational direction that we're going right now? Kind of. If you're Chicago and you seem to be on the verge of a rebuild, it makes more sense to take a swing on Modest, right? And see if he can be, you know, what other people think Modest can be, even though I would have taken Dalton over him. If you're, you know, Sacramento and you have all of these shooters already, like you already have Kevin Huerter, you have Malik Monk re-signed, go get the defender in Devin Carter, right? I think it was just like every single time that you went down the board. And then on top of it too, the other thing worth noting is when somebody starts to slide and they haven't worked out like in other places, right? Or in the places where their board, you know, has collapsed, right? Some teams just get hesitant. Like if they haven't met the kid, if they haven't, kind of gone through a few different things and, put him up on a board and like tried to understand his feel and something like it just gets like a little bit hesitant at the end of the day. So, that's why those situations can kind of, metastasize or whatever you want to call it and just kind of like grow and become worse and worse and worse. Kind of happened with Isaiah Collier tonight too, I would guess.
Right.
Where, Collier didn't go in for a lot of those teams in the 20s and, ended up being, kind of a faller. And the team that took him, by the way, was one that had a top 10 pick in Utah. Right. So probably felt a little bit more comfortable.
No, fair enough. Honestly, it's interesting because like people end up seeing this like mock drafts and you follow it over months and weeks or whatever you want to follow it, and you kind of have an idea of like, okay, he's worth this because I've seen him in this mock draft here and here. And so when it starts to slide, it always becomes a really sexy proposition. I also thought that it was just like would have fit the Raptors nicely. I mean, he's got a nice adaptable skill set. He's going to do really well with the Lakers. I mean, that's exactly kind of what they need. They're on a more pressed timeline anyway. I love the story that, like, JJ Redick's already drawing up plays for him and stuff. I'm like, all right, man, let's calm down just a little bit.
Chill out, JJ.
Yeah, seriously. But, so for the Raptors, they still hold 31, and I suppose they hold control over day 2. It'll be nice to sort of get a rest, everyone sort of come back in. If there was 5 players available right now for you right now in terms of just like who's between 31 and 35 for you right now for the Raptors, who should the Raptors be looking at here?
Yeah, so I have 5 guys left that had first round grades on my board, so it works perfectly. I have Kyle Filipowski, who I don't think they should take because they already have Kelly Olynyk, right? So like, very similar archetype. Unless you're going to move Olynyk, which I actually don't think you can do because he just signed the extension.
Yeah, they just signed.
So. Like, there's just not really a point there unless you're planning on moving him to the deadline or whatever. Johnny Furphy, I think, is like a very real, candidate here. 6'7" wing. Just take the Grady Dick redux, right? Like, let's just go crazy here.
How many shooting guards can the Raptors have? At this point, I'm like,
Furf and Dick. Let's do it. Let's just go crazy. So yeah, like I mean,
bar. Yeah.
6. Do you know what the funny thing is? Now you say that. So here in Australia.
Yeah.
And Johnny Furphy's Australian, so this just kind of comes full circle. One of the more popular, I wouldn't call it like a natty style beer. It's like the level above, like Natty Light. Is Furphy.
Got you.
So quite
Built-in
literally,
sponsorship.
Yeah, quite literally. Furphy and Dick's is a bar name, probably here somewhere in Australia. So who else here? I've got Tyler Kolek, who, point guard. I think he's a really, really creative guard and a really excellent passer, can score, has great footwork on the interior. He's not Jalen Brunson, but like the style of play in terms of how he plays is similar. The last 2 guys I have here are Tyler Smith, who's just like a big upside swing out of G League Ignite. I'm not super surprised he's still on the board for what it's worth. I'd kind of anticipated that would happen.
What's the reason for that? Like
big shooter. It's just, his defense was atrocious this season. There's not really another way to put it.
Yeah.
He was just really, really egregiously bad on defense this year. And, he needs to continue to grow and mature and figure out how to work through that piece of his game. Also, I think that, he kind of thinks of himself as more of a 3-4 when I think teams think of him as more of like a 4-5. Right.
Okay.
The final guy is AJ Mitchell. I love AJ Mitchell.
I was just going to ask you about him. Yeah.
I love AJ Mitchell. One of my favorites in this class. He is a lot closer stylistically, in my opinion, to Jalen Brunson than Tyler Kolek is. If you go to P3, the folks out in Santa Barbara where AJ Mitchell went to school at UC Santa Barbara, and where a lot of pre-draft prospects go and work out. They have this great big database of prospects, right? And Mitchell and Brunson's like athletic profile is like startlingly similar, bizarrely. Now it's all about skill. It's all about feel and footwork and improving and everything. But I would understand the upside swing on Mitchell from someone in their position.
No, I was going to say, because I was really hoping to ask you about him in particular, because I watched the interview that you did with him to look at his tape, which for people who are interested, or hopefully if the Raptors draft him, that's a great place to start. Like that would literally be my number 1 place to start. But like, Yeah, there's a lot of good things. I mean, first off, he seemed like a really personal guy, could really communicate
Yep.
well, like talk through sort of his process, walk through what he's seeing, which is always good. Like, that's a positive
Yeah.
of everything. But in terms of his game, too, I'm just like, I guess because he played in a situation where it's like not like a marquee situation, not a big name, wasn't like a huge recruit or anything like that. But when you
Yep.
watch the game and his profile, like I actually like him quite a bit. Now I think whatever the Raptors are going to take calls on the 31st pick, and NBA front offices are probably going to be, trying to reevaluate, and maybe the Raptors will field some calls. But like ultimately, if they do end up keeping the pick and making the pick, I would love to see AJ Mitchell go to the Raptors. But yeah, Sam,
Yeah.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
think where I'm at is look, there are enough players on the board to where it is very possible that I think they could decide to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like coming into tonight, I figured like, oh, like 99% chance they trade the pick. Right.
Really?
Yeah. Like I figured they just do the highest bidder thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like it just makes sense.
Yeah.
You see it most of the time in the NFL draft where like the team at the top will almost always just like take calls and be like, okay, we're selling to the highest bidder, second round.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it. But I think I'm a little bit less than that now. I would say.
Okay.
I think there's a chance they use 31, but
Yeah.
at the very least, I would expect them to make a pick tomorrow, like for sure.
Yeah, and I do know that they got AJ into Toronto for a workout, which is nice. But like, yeah, if they ultimately end up taking the pick, I would be pretty strongly in favor. But I appreciate you, Sam. I know you're really busy, so I don't want to take up more of your time. I know you're not trying to devote this much time to Jacobe Walter. I mean, it's not the most complex prospect to break down. I got to say, like,
No.
yeah, So
The reason I did this honestly is like the 31 is super fascinating to me.
yeah, okay.
31 and Jerome's the best. Like that's the big
Oh,
key,
yeah.
let's be honest. Like Jerome's an icon. We need
we're
to
keeping-
we need to give Jerome Cheng his props. But no, like the reason is honestly like 31 is a super interesting process, and I find this is something new for the NBA, right? Where a team has the entire night to trade a pick here at the top of the second round, and kind of talking through that a little bit is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the Raptors themselves were talking about like, they were having, I think Bobby came to the press conference afterwards and he talked about like, should we trade up into the lower 20s, get another pick in the first round towards the end there? I'm assuming involving the 31st pick. And then they're like, you know what, let's actually just take this time, process, and then come back to this tomorrow, which I'm sure a lot of front office will be doing. And I'm sure you'll be doing that as well. So Sam, I hope you get some rest. I hope you get some sleep. We're halfway through this thing, and I appreciate you so much. Jerome, you will be editing until 4 a.m. local time, but that's why you're the best. So thanks once again to Sam Vecenie. You can catch his work. Just honestly, if you're following the draft remotely, you know where to find Sam's work. So that's all that needs to be said here.
Thanks, Will.
All right, appreciate you guys.